Good morning, Mike.
I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised by what I saw when I read Forbes magazine yesterday, but I was quite taken aback, not only at the numbers of people who have made a fortune out of coronavirus in general, and the pandemic, and the obvious ones, of course, the people that came up with vaccines, the people that own medical companies and that kind of thing, but 14 out of the new billionaires in the world, 40 of them, are in China. And I mean, I guess, as I say, I shouldn't be that surprised, but it's taken me aback slightly.
Well, yeah, you're not surprised because, of course, if you think about it, where was the PPE, where was the equipment that we needed in the middle of this pandemic made? A lot of it was made in China. Right. So obviously, 14 of those people have done very well from this crisis, which, of course, originally resulted, as you stated a little earlier, because China allowed it to escape from their borders. So, I don't blame the people themselves. They've been, just making equipment. But, of course, they're in the middle of a pandemic that needn't have been a pandemic.
Well, quite. And even as we look now at the tests that we're being asked to do 2 a week of, they're all made in China as well.
Yeah, well, this comes down to supply chains, doesn't it? It comes down to where are the critical areas of infrastructure, of other national security related, health related equipment that you need as a country. Where's it produced? And we did a report last year looking into how much of a monopoly or stranglehold China had on lots of different areas of our economy, America's economy, Australia, Canada, New Zealand's economy. It doesn't make for pleasant reading.
No, it doesn't. And we've spoken many times, Alan, about the sort of the creeping power that China is exerting in places that we don't even know. I mean, has China sort of transformed, would you say, in the past year? Because as most of the world has suffered, China appears to, have got itself through this pandemic, doesn't seem to have really had to deal with any scrutiny much from the World Health Organization or those investigating what exactly happened in Wuhan. And they apparently have emerged even wealthier and more powerful than ever.
Well, yeah, of course, because they came out of this fairly early, as you stated. They've been able to contain it, or at least they claim they've contained it. As you know, Mike, nobody quite knows the truth of what's gone on in China and what indeed is happening, because the stats aren't believable. But nonetheless, what it looks like is they recovered, industrial production's back up, GDP's back up. And of course, it is the people who recover first, post the pandemic, who stand to benefit from essentially getting out there economically and increasing their market shares. And yes, I think over the last year, you will have seen this extraordinary paradox that the country where this started, which isn't collaborating with the World Health Organization even in helping to determine how exactly it started, will end up coming out as the sort of, having done the best out of it from an economic perspective.
And is there any room anywhere, or is there any appetite anywhere for a kind of windfall tax, if you like, of some kind? I mean, I don't know quite how it would be proposed, how it would be carried out, but there seems to be a good argument for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are numerous legal examples. I mean, it's actually just a year ago, yesterday, that we published our first coronavirus compensation paper, looking at the mechanisms that could be used to exact that kind of reparations, if you want to call it that, from China for their bad behaviour and allowing this to stem out. There are perfectly possible to do this on a country basis, on a civil court basis. There are ways that people could go around to getting it. But you're right to ask this about the appetite. Why is it that our politicians, and not just our politicians, are so reluctant to point the finger of blame at where it started? Yeah. Why are they so keen to go through this whole crisis and not say to the British people who've suffered so much? One of the reasons, not all, but one of the reasons this happened was because the Chinese lied about it starting, about what they knew about it. And as a result, what could have been contained domestically turned into an international and global pandemic that's affected you. Shouldn't we have answers to those questions at the very least?
Yeah, and I think Boris Johnson's sort of approach to China seems a little bit muddled at the moment, because we saw him talking a few weeks ago about having to make sure that we still maintain diplomatic ties and trading ties, but at the same time, we must be more careful about telling them off when they do things with the Uyghur population, for example.
Well, it is a schizophrenic approach. We all understand the economics behind it. We all get that we want Chinese investment and we want, the money to come in that way. But what we fail to appreciate, or what we have seen over the last year, time and time again, but then forget, it seems, is that money always has strings attached. There are, questions about what it is that the companies who are investing in the UK are actually up to. There are questions about at the Chinese end, some of the supply procedures, forced slavery, issues like this, the genocide matters that get involved in our supply chains for clothing and things like this. All these questions remain, largely unanswered. And it just won't do to have this sort of two-faced approach. And it becomes particularly farcical when you have examples like the Chinese sanctioning British members of parliament for, raising the truth about what's going on about human rights in Xinjiang. Now, how do you have a partner who then sanctions your own members of parliament?
Yeah, and nothing really much was said about that. Boris Johnson, I think, about 3 days after the story broke, said something about how he stood full square behind those people who had been sanctioned by China. But he didn't really go much further than that.
Well, no, they had a lovely photo shoot in number 10 Downing Street. They stood together, in resolute opposition. But, you'd have thought that would have led to a downgrading of diplomatic relations, a complaint. Nothing of that kind has happened. And it shows the Chinese that they can get away with this kind of behavior if there's going to be no comeback. And it's not just us. I want to make it clear. What needs to happen for the Chinese to be faced down comprehensively, the Chinese Communist Party to be faced down, is for there to be a collective approach across Western countries. That, by the way, is what happened with those sanctions. You had the US, the UK, and the EU all coming together to apply human rights sanctions on the Chinese. But it should have, we should have had a follow-up process as well to say to the Chinese, right, you want to sanction more of our people, we've got plenty more of yours that we're going to keep on sanctioning, and off we go.
Yeah. And what exactly is the setup now in Chinese society? Because with all these billionaires, one of whom apparently became wealthy practically overnight, Li Wangquan, president of Chinese medical products manufacturer Winner Medical, because they made all the masks and PPE that we ended up bringing in from that part of the world. I mean, is there a kind of three-tier society now in China? Because I'm obviously, like most people, completely ignorant of what actually goes on within the country.
Well, look, you've got the Communist Party that controls everything. I mean, that in reality is what happens in China. And you've got to separate that, of course, from the Chinese people, but then you've got to, of course, then work out the people who work within the system, essentially, who may not be communists themselves, but are playing by those rules. Most of these billionaires are going to be people who are obviously, have gained from the system. They're part of the system. They have to play by its rules, of course, because we've seen what happens, by the way, to those, Chinese billionaires even, who, sometimes speak out. People like Jack Ma, you saw he disappeared for a long time, and then lots of questions about about his future as a result. So it shows you've got a totalitarian state. It's a state that crushes dissent. It means that, people have to go along with what it does. But I suppose the question, the long-term question on this is, for how long can China maintain that policy? How long will this, coercive control work when it is becoming a richer country and you're seeing a bigger middle class, a bigger set of people who understand that the world doesn't have to be run the way that the Chinese Communist Party runs it?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because with that, sort of onset of capitalism, if you like, as you say, there will be a burgeoning middle class, and it'll be the middle class that ends up making the difference. Whereas we, on the other hand, are listening to organisations about kind of, vaccine passports, and listening to evidence from people who have been to China who talk about the surveillance society that they all live under, one which apparently this government would like us to copy.
Well, I know where you're going with that, Mike. I think it's slightly different. The level of surveillance in China is extraordinary. I mean, you can't breathe without someone, working out what's actually going on in that kind of way.
Yeah, no, we spoke to Neil Oliver yesterday, who was on a filming trip there, and he said basically everything was done on an app. They had their handlers who would take them to a restaurant. They would book it on the app. They would pay for it on the app. No money was ever exchanged. Everybody knew what was being ordered. Everybody knew who was eating what. Everybody knew what everybody was drinking, where they went, where they were going next. I mean, that is a kind of app that is being talked about here. I'm not suggesting that the Conservatives want to turn this into communist China, but there is that kind of fear amongst some people.
Well, obviously, there are civil liberties questions when it comes down to, what you're doing with pandemic-related responses. I think the big difference, of course, is that the Chinese Communist Party was employing these systems a long time before the pandemic and will be employing them a long time after the pandemic as well, because its whole rationale is control. And the degree of control is extraordinary. I mean, if you say the wrong thing on a social media platform, on a messaging service, you can have your benefits stripped, you can have all sorts of things taken away from you in China. That's a level of control.
Yeah.
Now, look,
this is this social credit system they're talking about, right?
Correct, exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. So they are literally thought policing you. They are literally saying that is how you operate. And again, for all that there is a legitimate debate to be had about civil liberties in this country, nobody would suggest that the British government is going down that kind of path. Okay?
No, they're not.
But it does, what it does show you, though, and this is important, it does show you that technology can be used for good or for bad. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but also, organisations like Big Brother Watch, who are thankfully looking out for us in this regard, would say that some of the technology that would have to be used for, say, a vaccine passport, if it was to be the digital kind that the government have talked about, they would be collecting that kind of data on individuals. Now, what they do with that data obviously would be different, presumably, to what China would do with it, but they'd still be collecting it.
Well, I think that's a question government has to answer. It has to answer, look, what happens to that data? Where is it stored? How long do we keep it for? Issues like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I do take all this with a pinch of salt in the sense that people who use Facebook, Google, Instagram, all these things basically are giving away so much data on a daily basis. They may not know they're doing it, but they really are. All the things you've just said, I can assure you, Facebook and Google, if you use their platforms, know where you've been shopping, what you've been doing, where you'll be drinking next week. They'll know all of that as well.
Yeah. Oh, there's no question. I mean, I'm constantly baffled, although I shouldn't be baffled at all, by having had a conversation. And this is, by the way, with all the microphones on all my devices switched off, I could be talking to somebody about something. Next time I go on Facebook, there's an advert for something that I've been talking about. I still haven't worked out how they're doing that.
It's shocking, isn't it? But
Yeah.
it just tells you that you don't even need to have your microphones.
No.
They are listening somehow.
Right.
Remember what the Amazon guy said at one point about Alexa? He wouldn't use Alexa in his house because Alexa just picks up everything.
Yeah.
In that sort of way.
And I mean,
we're told to be careful of.
We're told that very possibly, smart TVs do the same thing, even when they're in standby mode. So people say, well, you must pull out the plug, otherwise. I mean, part of me doesn't care about that. But what I do worry about is these latest conversations which are being had. And I think actually they will fall down eventually. I don't think we'll see a vaccine passport. And I think we're seeing more and more the government moving away from that. But I think there are those who would like to do it. But if it means that you can't go somewhere as a result of whatever medical condition you might have, and then when insurance companies start asking questions about what preconditions you may have before we give you life insurance, you can all start to get a little bit interesting.
Well, I hope. Look, you're asking the questions that I hope our members of parliament will be asking when it comes into discussion debate about this. Look, I think some of them are already doing it and saying, "Look, we understand the need to open up the country. But we've got to balance that with the idea of, of the data collection side of this. And is this absolutely necessary? And some of the exceptions you've just mentioned about people who can't have the vaccine, there can't be a system, basically, can there, where there is a two-tier society?
No.
If you choose not to take the vaccine because you don't want to take it, that's one thing. But if you can't take it, that's clearly another. And there's got to be a way around that. Now. That has to be debated, discussed. It's great you've raised it today. I think, we need to have answers on that question as to how you get by that and what that process is. And also, let's be honest, nobody wants this to be even remotely permanent, even if we get it at all. The idea that this could be the future normal, is a terrifying prospect. The idea that things that in February 2020 were, you could go without any kind of ID anywhere and suddenly you have to carry ID. It's a concern, obviously.
Yeah.
So I think the government has to answer questions about how long does it intend to do this for? What is the situation here? And then we have to ask also, what's the position of the other parties on this? Are they happy to go along with it?
Well, that's right. And also, I think we have to look beyond COVID, I suppose. And I'm assuming that China is doing that, because my next question to you was going to be, where does China see itself, in 10 years' time? Because clearly they're on the march, if you like. I mean, it was no accident that freighter that ran aground in the Suez Canal was coming from China. They're all over the world. They're in South America in a big way. They're in Africa massively, taking hold of all the minerals out of the ground. They're building infrastructure in the Southeast Pacific. I mean, what do you think China sees itself as in 10 years?
Well, China would see itself in a even greater economic and strategic position than it is today. Its whole purpose, I mean, this is where they have really stolen a march on the world. Their plan has been in place for 20 to 30 years, Mike, already. We've been going, this is a benign trading partner, economic interest. It's not. It's about securing Chinese greatness for logical reasons from their part. I mean, obviously, who wouldn't want to be a great country? That's the way it works. But they have laid a careful plan for how, using economic means, they can actually generate that power and that prestige around the world.
Yeah.
That plan is in full flow. It's happening right now, as you've pointed out, and it's only going to intensify unless we are alive to that reality and choose to stop it and say, look, of course we want to trade, there's no harm in that, but we're not going to allow our economies to be under your control in any way, shape or form, because frankly, we just don't know what your true intentions are.
Yeah. I mean, many years ago, I think under the Obama administration, it was said that China owned most of America's debt, and it was America that kind of was in hock, if you like, to China, who had bought all the bonds that basically were keeping America going. Would that then be the case for the rest of the world now? Because obviously the amount of money that we're now borrowing as a country is prodigious. I don't think anybody can even put a number on it. It's so big. But are we in hock to China financially?
Well, I think, the way the financial markets work, it's always, dangerous to say, oh, you're in hock to this country or that country. The reality is the global financial system only works because everyone is interdependent on it. If one country were to start pulling out the debt stops in various ways, I think you would find there were ways that country was, is itself affected by it. I mean, don't forget, China itself does rely upon trade flows. It does rely upon those activities as well. So there is always that, the idea that, you turn on one, there's a whole chain reaction that occurs. And we learned, did we not, even in the financial crisis of 2008, that even when one bank failed, one big bank failed, it had a ripple effect that affected the entire economy. So, I don't see the debt issue as being a major problem in terms of global politics. What I think we do, though, have to establish quite clearly are the red lines beyond which we want to make sure we have control in our economies.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Dr. Alan Mendoza, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Founder and Executive Director at the Henry Jackson Society, talking about the power and the wealth of China now.